Okay, so we are going to begin the session, and I just found it so exciting that I could share uh, this this study. So let's begin. So let's begin. Okay. So I recently discovered that I had access to the NET's ancillaries, and I thought to myself, this is wonderful. I am going to have a lot of fun with it. So that is what I'm going to do at this. Just refresh my memory as continue to study uh, using knitters. And so it's quite exciting and very much exciting. So I'm mainly focusing on plates 4, plates 6, and 8 and 15 in the 5th edition of Knitter's Anatomy. So this is it. And so here we go. Okay. This is quite exciting because the rotational view just gives a whole view of it. And trying to turn the label on because, right, that's so much better when you have the labels on. And you can learn it at first and get to understand what it is first. So get to understand all the bones at first. So they're color coded, which is not what it looks like in real life. But this is why knitters is so popular, I guess, and so much better to learn from because they break it down to for you to understand. Uh, I think anyone can get to understand because they break it down with the colors and get everyone involved, and you can understand what exactly is going on. So starting off with the parietal bone, and as is color coordinated here, we can see um, the parietal bone constituting much of the hemisphere. So the parietal bone in the green, in the green. Right, I have to make sure these labels stay on for this session, for this time being. And it shows us that the bone anterior to the parietal bone in this section here, where the rotator is the blue, is the frontal bone. And on each bone, there are going to be particular features that are on that bone, particular features that are on that bone. And so what you have separating the frontal bone and the parietal bone is what is known as the coronal suture. The coronal suture. And on the bone that is behind, well, at the back, that is what we would call the occipital bone. The occipital bone. And then we have the temporal bone, which is highlighted in this pink, this light pink. That was the temporal bone. And the sphenoid bone is much rather sort of found more, it's more prominent inside, as you see if we rotate the view of the skull. Um, we have the maxilla in this section, yeah, the maxilla in this section here, and uh, the nasal bone, the lacrimal bone, the mandible. Uh-huh. And so, like I said before, each bone has specific features to it that are particular to it, that constitute that bone. So this is just a simplified view, as I can see, just for the purposes of remembering. But as you look, you can see that there are particular features on each bone. For example, we have the frontal bone, and right over here, you see how they have called it the supraorbital notch for foramen, the supraorbital notch foramen. And even if you feel it on your own body and you kind of hold the area just above your eye socket, you can kind of feel what it is they're referring to when you can feel you can feel that part um, that is the supraorbital notch. Then you have what is called the glabella on the frontal bone as well. And it will be more prominent when we see this frontal view, this one here. It'll be more prominent when we look at that more frontal view. And so this is just the lateral view of it. And each bone has particular features that are just unique to that each bone. Then the sphenoid bone, in this lateral aspect, you will only see the greater wing of the sphenoid bone, which is quite exciting. This is very exciting. And the maxilla has different things as well on it. For example, the frontal process over here, it's pointing, the infraorbital foramen, where it's pointing, the anterior nasal spine, which is also a part of the maxilla, and the alveolar processes. Now, these alveolar processes, they're sort of like processes that come and then overlap where the teeth are going to be, and right where the sort of constitute the sockets of the teeth, the sockets of the teeth. So um, that's that aspect. Then you have quite an interesting bone here. the zygomatic bone, the zygomatic bone here in this section, the zygomatic bone, and the features that are included in this section include the zygomatofacial foramen, the temporal process over here, uh, and the zygomatic arch, the zygomatic arch in this section here. And interestingly enough, when you look at the temporal bone, it's going to have a zygomatic process, which is sort of extending towards the zygomatic bone. And so in anatomy, it's quite simple sometimes because the relationships just show themselves as you see each as you hear the names, you can kind of put it together because in anatomy it is sort of relational. Yes, it's related to each other. So spatial relationships or something next to that thing. And then it's really quite easy to understand the names and the naming sometimes. And it's really quite exciting. It's really quite exciting. You have the squamous part of the temporal bone, which constitutes much of that like flat, rounded sort of area here. You have what is called the articular tubercle. The articular tubercle, which is by the zygomatic process. And one of the things I learned from some of my anatomy professors and teachers before was that when you see tubercles and processes and just areas um, that are named, and you might overlook it and think that it doesn't matter. Um, it matters because these are going to be the areas of attachment for different bones and different bones, tendons, ligaments, and things that are quite important. That are quite important. So this is quite an interesting view because this is very much just simplified because if you really want to then go much more deeper, which is very advisable because you will need to know where attachments of muscles and other bones and things go. This will be very vital for you to do so. Um, okay, I want to move on to okay, because we were on. Okay, let's see it load. Let's see this you loading up. The other end. It's really the same thing on one end and the other because it's really quite symmetrical if you think about it. Because if you think about anatomy, at the right and the left side, it, it is supposed to be symmetrical, and well, normally anyway. And just being able to see that there's not going to be much difference from the right to the left. Maybe when you come to soft tissue, but on a skeletal point of view, the right and the left are going to be um, exactly the same because it has to be symmetrical. So just to remember. And so now here you can actually see much more because with this view um, more open in this area, you can see different sutures. So we've talked about the coronal suture here. We've talked about now we want to look at the other sutures that are here, the lambdoid suture, but then that would be more prominent in in a view that is backward. If I were able to, let me see if I can uh rotate it. Let me see how much it could rotate to allow view of the back. How much it could rotate to allow view of the back. Okay. Let's just let it load. Let it load. It's quite a thing um to keep it there. Okay. Uh-oh. We want the labels back on. Right. Back at it. All right. Okay. Okay. Right. Okay, turn it back a bit. Right. I wanted to bring it back this way so I could explain the lambdoid suture much better. And as you see, um, okay, it's got a full on it's got on a full on tangent. All right, we'll wait for it to load again. We'll wait for it to load again. Right. As you can see here, the extension of the coronal suture, so you can see it much better. As you see like an probably like an aerial view of the actual skull, and you see the coronal suture in this section here, and this would have to be the parietal, the sagittal suture, the coronal suture, and the sagittal suture, dividing the two parietal bones in this section. Okay, coming back around. See, rotate, because we want to see uh, more of the back. Now, here where we have the occipital bone joining with the two um, the occipital bone joining with the two parietal bones, the left and right. And it kind of makes like a shape like a lambda, hence the name lambdoid suture. So that's also quite exciting. And, that's also quite exciting, and seeing where anatomy, like, um, sometimes the naming is quite literal and is referring to something so something outside of what you're doing. So it's quite exciting to remember all that. Okay, I'm gonna turn the labels back on. Turning the labels back on. Okay. turn them back on. Right, okay. Right. And looking at it, just as I was saying, with the occipital bone, and then you have the lambdoid suture, and they're really points where, like areas of potential weakness and areas where previously there had been fontanelles. For example, if you that's lambda, that's lambda. It's like the central point of that lambda, the point, the occipital bone along the lambdoid suture and where the two sutures meet, basically. So lambdoid suture and sagittal suture meet at point lambda. And looking at the anterior one, called the bregma, and this is where you have the sagittal suture and the coronal suture coming together, and we would call that bregma. And I'm also gonna go ahead and show you the other ones. Let's have a look at plate, another plate that would help us. Okay, right. And the other one would be here. You see this point where different sutures are meeting up, different sutures are meeting up, and it's like points where different bones are meeting up. And the next one is called the asterion. It's sort of like shaped like a star, I suppose, hence the name asterion. So you have here uh, a part of the lambdoid suture here, and then the beginning of the temporal bone, and then so you have what is known as the asterion right here, asterion here, and then one of my favorite ones that I love. I don't even know why it's shaped like an H. If you look at um over here, you look here, uh, the coronal suture coming down, sort of in that line, and then you get this part, the squamous part of uh, the squamous part of the temporal bone, and you get that line crossing there. And then what this is known as, that sort of H shape, if you remember, that H shape is known as the pterion, or I don't know if others would pronounce it as pterion, but pterion. And this is a place of great significance because it's a great place of weakness. And it's also significant because the middle cerebral artery is normally passes right under there. And so, and passes directly under there. So if there is trauma to the side of the head in this area, it could cause great damage to the middle cerebral artery. And if you can remember what kinds of changes, right? You'll see changes in changes being an acronym. Changes when you have some kind of a stroke in that area, maybe hemorrhagic due to the trauma. And so I guess there'll be confusion, hemiparesis, what is A, neglect, selective neglect, and then E and S. Okay, that will be covered in another section. But as this is revision of the anatomy first of all. But when we get there, the changes that actually means something. The CH, A N uh, GES. So the changes mean something. But the H that I'm very sure about is the hemiparesis. The hemiparesis. So just it's a good thing to remember that this is particularly interesting and particularly of importance because cerebral artery, which is directly under the pterygium region. Right. Now we're gonna have a look at the frontal aspect of the skull. The frontal aspect of the skull. Looking at the frontal aspect of the skulls, it's really quite simple. It's really quite simple because the same bones are there. And what you need to remember as well, I forgot to mention, is that the skull is divided into the calvarium and the actual facial skull. So the is made up of total of I think 8 bones. Total of 8 bones. Okay, we can try count them. The calvarium, the top part. So you have your frontal bone. That's one. You have the occipital bone. Um, you have two parietal bones. You have um, and then two parietal bones and two parts of the temporal bones. That's six. And you have what else? What else? What else? I guess part of the sphenoid bone makes part of the calvarium. Part of the sphenoid bone makes part of the calvarium. So you have 8 bones constituting what is known as the calvarium, and then 14 bones constituting the facial aspect of the skull. So I do a much more deeper on these bones because every process and every surface matters because it's an attachment for somebody. You don't want to just overlook it and think, oh, it's just a bone or this prominence doesn't matter because every single prominence will matter because it's an attachment for something. Yeah. So just looking at the front, and you can see the frontal aspect of the maxilla. We have to look at it on a sideways view. So you see this orbital surface, the zygomatic process. You see how now the zygomatic process, this is now reaching towards the zygomatic arch. So it's the zygomatic bone, right? The zygomatic bone. So it's really quite relational. Anatomy is a very relational. The infraorbital foramen, all right, and these things are very common because these are things that matter in terms of there's something that's going to go through that infraorbital foramen. So it's not just just a foramen that's just there. These foramen or foramina and notches and prominences, they're very essential areas that um, that have that carry a lot of significance because they carry a lot of the different nerves and attachments for muscles and tendons and stuff. So then you have the frontal process, or yeah, we talked about that before. The zygomatic process, the alveolar process, anterior nasal spine, right there. If you're actually like just starting anatomy, they actually really love to test you on the little things on there. So it makes sense to really get a very extensive knowledge on your anatomy and not just just browse through it, because it really is a fundamental subject. So that is uh, really important to remember that. And then you have that sort of violet bone here, and it's called the vulva right here. Uh-huh. Okay. They kind of take too long to um they take quite long um to load up, quite long to load up. And so it takes such a long time as you do that. Yeah, it really is quite, because looking at if you're looking in your own right, and then there's the beautiful Roma right there where they've dulled everything out, and it's quite um it's much better when you view it in 3D, like, so you see it prominently and properly. Um, I'm just gonna go back to the home view. Mhm. So if you're looking in your actual Netta's hard copy book, as I have the fifth edition, and I'm looking at plate 4 and just looking at how we've progressed, and think that it's really quite simple. It's really quite simple, but practice, 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 because um, there's no way you're gonna remember anything if you just do it once and think that will stick in your head forever. You have to keep refreshing your memory. So it's like an exact plate for this view over here. It's like an exact plate for. So um, continuing with that, if you look down now, okay, and then we had what? The anterior nasal spine right there. That's part of the maxilla. All right, now looking down at the mandible is quite an interesting balloon in itself. And you have the ramus, the ramus, the mental foramen, the mental tubercle, and mental protuberance. You got like layman's terms like, oh, my chin, my chin. And as an anatomist or someone who's learned anatomy, it's quite exciting because you can then be like, oh wow, what, I know what this is. It's the mental tubercles, the mental protuberance. It's quite it's anatomy is just very exciting. Anatomy is very exciting. So watch out for that then, and be excited about learning anatomy because it is really very exciting. Really very exciting. Now I want to move on to base. The base. That is very, very interesting now. Um, and it will take time for you to really understand it. If this is your first time learning anatomy, it will take time for you to really get to understand all of it. And because now you're looking at the turned view of like the lower part of the whole skull, looking from underneath. And so starting off, as you can see, the occipital bone uh, in this area. And you have this great big hole right there, and which is known as the foramen magnum. And the foramen magnum is basically uh, the the hole or the foramen. Yeah, well, foramen, is like hole or like yeah, basically like hole because that's Latin. If you're interested, it would be great to learn Latin too because Latin, learning your terms in Latin makes it so much more fun because you get to learn Latin. I mean, it's wonderful, but you can just learn them in English if you want. But foramen magnum is basically the foraminal hole where the the spinal cord and the meninges, um, the spinal cord and the protective meninges come out of the brain and into the spinal canal. All right, so that's the foramen magnum, out of the brain into the spinal canal, and this is a common area for herniation when we're not talking of increased intracranial pressure, and someone decerebrating. If the cerebellum is coming out here, that could um, instantly cause death if the patient decerebrates. So important areas like this. Then you have the different parts as well. So forgot the basilar pars basilarix or the basilar part. Um, then you have pars squamosa and squamous part. But and then you also have a pharyngeal, the occipital condyles, the condylar canal, condylar canal. So, like I said, when you're actually reading extensively. Pay attention to those little details because that gives you that extra, that makes you know what actually is going on with a human being. So, starting from scratch, just pay particular attention to each bone. Don't don't miss out so much because this is just a review for us to just see, what is going on. So for you, if you're starting out anatomy, make sure that you're taking it one step at a time. It's so important to take it one step at a time. And you see why we had to flip it over and see the different details on the different bones that you would not necessarily see um, that we would not necessarily see from the top or the sides. And it's so much more prominent, it's so much more interesting and exciting from this view. For example, if you look at the spinal bone, which is uh you could say it's quite complicated, but you break it down into small areas, as we learned earlier that the greater wing is visible from the side view. The greater wing is visible from the lateral view. This one with the pointer over here, and it's got different um, details on it that is so prominent and so useful. And for example, the pterygoid process, the pterygoid processes. You have what is the hamulus, the medial plate, the hamulus, the medial plate, the pterygoid fossa, the lateral plate. Mhm. Then you have what is known as scaphoid fossa, the greater wing, foraminal valve, foramen spinosum. Uh-huh. So take your time to read and learn these one by one, and then point them out for yourself because it's important to get this knowledge and all these foramina, all these foramina, foramen letter. Since this is impromptu, just like a breather, a whole, just a review from a long, long time ago. It's been quite a while since I've done a revision, so I thought, why not share this great resource that I have, Impromptu, just to see, where I'm at and what I actually remember. And then I'll do a much more extended view of this where I'm explaining what each of those foramina represent and what they carry, because that's where I see is more important. That's where I see is more important. You see the carotid canal, the palatine bones over here. Palatine bone. You wouldn't know there's such a bone, and what it would actually look like unless you looked underneath, unless you looked from the inferior view. So this is why I totally love this 3D application. This 3D resource that I have, and right, it's so much better. All right. Right. It's been quite a while, yeah. It's been quite a while. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end it over here. I've had quite a bit of an overview already, and I feel that that's enough. And now I can see the areas that I actually need to work on. And okay, I don't know why it goes. Okay. Anyway, why I these are annoying. Anyway, um. I've had quite enough, and I think that I will continue and I will go on to explain each and every bone separately because, as I said before, this was just an overview, a review for myself to see where I'm at, and now I know where I'm at and what I need to accomplish, where I want to get to. So, if you'd like to see um, the one by one, each bone, explained each foramen, explained each protuberance, explained. Just let me know in the comments down below. Um, Please like, share, subscribe. And if you'd like to see more content pertaining to anatomy, which I will be uploading, just let me know. So please like, share, and subscribe. And thank you so much for hanging out with me at this time. And I will be uploading more and more content. But for now, I'm gonna have to leave you. And thank you so much for your attention and me. It's been wonderful, and hopefully you continue to watch and support. Thank you so much. All right.